And Ahmed, earlier you mentioned the grandfathering clause. What is that, and how do you see that having an impact in the next 12 months leading up to that September 30th, 2026 event?
Yeah, so when it's a great question, Sam. So when we talk about grandfathering, what we're referring to is a specific section of the RIA. So if you're unfamiliar with the RIA in general, it's a Reform and Integrity Act that was passed in I believe March of 2022 that basically reauthorized the EB-5 program for a period of 5 years up until September of 2027. At the same time, one of the big concerns, and so it's the Reform and Integrity Act, in it by itself, its name tells you what the purpose was. It was to kind of fix a lot of the problems that were going on in EB-5. And one of those problems were in the past when the program sunset or was basically reached its climax, there wasn't protection for investors who had already filed. And so what that meant was if you had already filed and then the program basically sunset or ceased to exist, your application could now just be in limbo and not processed. And so what Congress did was they included a protection that said, okay, if you file by a certain date, no matter what happens in the future, your application will be processed and it won't be affected by any future changes in the program. Now, that all makes sense, and it's a great protection for investors. It's fantastic. But what doesn't make sense is that for whatever reason, when it was written into the statute, although the program itself is extended until September 2027, the grandfathering or the protection was only afforded until September 30th, 2026. So we are officially into the last 12 months of when grandfathering applies. Investors who are filing until September 30th, 2026 can kind of rest assured that their application, regardless of what happens to EB-5 in the future, will always be adjudicated under the rules that they have filed under, which are the rules of today. Anything beyond September 30th, 2026 up until September 30th, 2027, technically would still follow the rules that we have, but there's no protection that if the program were then to sunset, that those investors' applications would continue to be processed. So it's a pretty tenuous kind of position to be in as an EB-5 investor when you're putting that much money on the line. From a regulatory standpoint, we've got some notion, and a lot of folks in the industry have been clamoring to get that grandfathering clause extended through 2027, but there isn't anything concrete yet, and we haven't seen any real progress on that front just yet. So as of right now, the date that investors should keep in mind that they should be applying by is September 2026. Now, here's where I think a lot of the industry is kind of just looking at total numbers and completely forgetting that country caps also serve to protect. And I think that this is just a product of us, if you're talking to a lot of Indian investors or Chinese investors, they're so used to being screwed over by the country caps in the EB2 and EB3 categories that they haven't realized yet that actually country caps were initially instituted to protect some countries. And when you're not the majority filing country in a category, you actually get a little bit of protection versus a, kind of it's screwing you over. And so bad news for China, they are the majority. And so they're the ones whose visas kind of get taken away more and more as other countries file. But what I really want to highlight here is India, right? 2,804 total applications since the beginning of the RIA. And I think that, we've certainly got close to 700 approvals since that time. I know that I've seen some other regional centers that have posted similar numbers. I assume that a lot of the industry is seeing a lot of those approvals. And I'm assuming that, again, at least 20% of those approvals are coming from Indian applicants. And so what that really means then is that there's less, I'm going to wager a guess that there's less than about 2,500 pending applications for Indians specifically. And then you multiply that number by 2 and you get 5,000 total applications for India that have to be issued, 5,000, visas or green cards that have to be issued, okay? Now, when we look at total visas allotted in the EB-5 category, remember, you hit your country cap first. And so if you just look at 10,000 visas, you're going to be looking at 700 visas per country, right? 10,000 total in the EB-5 category, 700 per country. But it's actually a little bit better than that because of rollovers, because of trickle down. You do get closer to about 16 to 18,000 per year that are actually available in the EB-5 category. And guess what? India and China and all the other countries each get 7% protection from that number. And so it's not really like 700 per year. It's closer to about 1,000 per year that each country is getting. And so if you've got 5,000 folks or maybe even 6,000 folks who are waiting for their green cards from India, well, guess what? Your maximum kind of backlog starts to look a lot closer to like 5 or 6 years in the worst case scenario than some of the other crazy numbers I've seen out there of like 12 or 15 years. So it's really important to understand this red text right here is really what I want to point out to people. We're doing easy math here. We're kind of making a lot of assumptions here to showcase this data and help people understand that, look, a backlog is coming, and it's very difficult to understand how long that backlog is going to be. But it's really important to understand that there's so many different factors that go into calculating just how long a backlog is going to take before you're able to get your green card. And it's really important to understand all those individual factors and how they play against with one another. So this first bullet point right here that you're looking at that says, look, there's two specific countries. Obviously, we see the demand from both India and China. They are going to have a backlog at some point in the near future. It's really important for those investors, if you want to do EB-5, to get in before that backlog actually appears, because once it does, you're not going to be able to get your adjustment of status in concurrently, and you're not going to be able to get that EAD and advanced parole, the work and travel permit. So more than ever, there's a little bit of a ticking clock for Indian and Chinese investors to get in while they can, secure their status in the States, and then it could be a 3-year wait, it could be a 5-year wait, it could be a 7-year wait, as we just talked about. It might even be longer for some Chinese investors to get their conditional green cards. But the big advantage that everyone seems to have kind of gleaned over from when we first started with the AOS concurrent filings is that you get status and an EAD and an advanced parole. And for all intents and purposes, that's going to do away with a lot of the hardship that people are facing by having to go through the H-1B lottery every year, having to go through their employer for their visas, for their green card sponsorship, and especially when your company has layoffs, because then they're no longer able to sponsor you for a perm. NIWs are not being approved at the same rate that they were before, and neither are EB-1As, or EB-1Cs, or EB-1s in general. So it's become, in some ways, the only path to a green card within a decade. And there's a big difference between filing before the visa bulletin retrogresses and after. So I would say more now than ever, investors should be, if they're considering EB-5, now is the time to pull the trigger.
And this is something whenever I'm speaking with an investor, I try to reinforce, which is we, the project, will not be the bottleneck in the process. It will be the source of funds and working with the immigration attorney to complete that source of funds. So what I always suggest is, even before you pick out your project, you should focus on finding the immigration attorney you're going to work with and get them moving. Unfortunately, due to having many slow years in EB-5, there's a limited number of firms that specialize in EB-5, and with the demand going up and to the right, and especially after the Trump Gold Card announcement, a lot of the immigration attorneys are pretty busy right now. It's not like they're sitting around doing nothing. So I would strongly suggest start reaching out and engage that immigration attorney as quickly as possible to start on your source of funds once you've made the decision that EB-5 is the right fit. And the other reason I highlight that is because we've had many investors that kind of go through and choose a deal, and then they engage their attorney, and by the time they get done with source of funds in 2 months, 3 months, that deal sold out and it's not there anymore, and they have to start that whole process over of diligencing a project. And sometimes they're pretty upset that that project isn't available, and it happens all too often. So I'd say, to me, just seeing big picture what's going on with the data, with the number of filings, with how fast approvals are coming. It's really just a matter of deciding, is EB-5 the solution for you and the family? And if so, don't hesitate. Hire an attorney. We're happy to provide introductions. You can find a lot online as well, and start working with them and organizing your documents so that you can then get to that stage of picking the project that's available at the time when you're ready to actually make the investment. So that to me is really the key here. Is we know there's a line coming. Approvals are coming fast. Visa bulletin's still current, could be current for a month, could be current all next year. We really don't know. But if you're committed, you should start now. And this is, I believe we're the only company that actually shares our data on this. Of all of the 526E approvals that we have, we publish. We want everyone to have clear and transparent information. And what I'd say is, what you can see also is this line is down and to the right. Speed of approvals is absolutely coming down. Now, a vast majority of these approvals are for rural deals. The high unemployment deals that we've had, some of them have been approved organically, and that's going to be what you see in kind of the top left of the graph with the Saltaire project. And it just takes a little bit longer for those high unemployments. But recently, in the rural projects that we have, where you can see the people that filed, let's say, second half of 2024 onwards, tons and tons of approvals, where if you look at the amount of approvals in under a year, it's well over 75% on just this chart. But then when you actually look at it, of the ones in the last like 2 years that have filed in that time frame, it's much more significant, where we can pretty confidently say that it's more than a 50% chance you're going to be approved in like that 6 to 9 month period or shorter. So it's really powerful to actually see the data, see how fast the approvals are coming. It's not a small sample size. So you're able to really get an idea of how fast these applications are getting processed.